should the OMB process look like moving forward? Our goal is to have open, honest, and productive conversations. We know this group brings a lot of different experiences and perspectives to the table, and we're excited to hear from everyone. So really appreciate everyone being here and continuing to be here with us for these discussions. And with that, I'm going to hand things over to Carol to cover some housekeeping, and then we'll get us started. So Carol.
Good morning, everyone. Carol Moreno, Senior Policy Analyst, and I just wanted to give folks a quick reminder that we are live streaming and this meeting is being recorded. Meetings can be viewed on our website at the Oregon Motor Voter Rules Advisory Committee on the Secretary of State's website afterwards. And because members of the public cannot view our chat due to the Teens Town Hall settings, our facilitators will just read out loud anything that gets put into the chat. So just wanted to share that for folks' awareness. And we will go around now again and just restate names, restate roles for the public to be aware. So I'm with the Secretary of State's office, and I'll pass it off to Kat.
Hi, I'm Kat Schwartz. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the voter registration integrity analyst with ODOT and DMV. And I'll pass to Tracy.
Good morning, Tracy Kravchenko, Clatsop County Clerk, and I've been a clerk for about 8 years, been in elections for over 30, and I'm happy to be on this, representing the Oregon Association of County Clerks. I'll pass it to David.
Thanks. I'm David Becker. I'm the founder and executive director of the nonpartisan nonprofit Center for Election Innovation and Research based in Washington, D.C. We work with election officials all over the country of both parties, helping them manage elections that voters should and do trust. And we've been working particularly in the voter registration space and automatic voter registration for quite some time. I led the effort to help create ERIC back about 15 years ago.
Awesome.
Oh, and I'm sorry, I didn't hand it off to someone. Who's left? Ulysses?
Hey, thank you, David. Sorry, I'm on the run. Let me get back to my desk. Hi, my name is Ulysses. I'm a program coordinator here at Innovation Law Lab. I use he, him pronouns. And let's see who else is available. I think that might have been everyone. Am I missing anyone?
Yeah, I'll go ahead. Thanks.
Oh, okay.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Ann Burke Jones. I use they, them pronouns. I'm the elections administration manager here. I think we have two other folks from the Secretary of State's office on the call. I'll have them introduce themselves and then we'll get started. So I'll pass it over to Shana.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Shana Rogers. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the general counsel for the Secretary of State. Vanessa?
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm Vanessa Campuzano Villalobos, she, her, and I'm the Constituent Services Specialist with Oregon Secretary of State Office. Thanks for being here.
All right, thank you everyone for introducing yourself. We will get started again. So like Dina said, this is week 3 of our OMB RAC, where we are specifically covering voter registration, cover transactions at the DMV. I see we also have our other RAC member that just joined us, so I will kick it over to Michelle to introduce herself.
Good morning. Sorry about being late. I kept getting this weird message that I wasn't able to join. I'm Michelle. I work at the Coos Bay field office for DMV. I also am an SEIU local president 735. Is there anything else I need to say?
No, that's great. Okay. Thanks for joining, Michelle. Didn't mean to throw you on the spot like the moment you joined. So this is our third week going over the same module. So just want to say at the top that we'll be doing a lot of review. We're just going over, I mean, it's honestly the same slide deck from the first week. And it's the whole point of this is to cover to go over the rules that we had initially proposed, to try to highlight the feedback and recommendations that we had got from RAC members, and then to just encourage us to all, this can be some pretty dense material, so we wanted to provide multiple opportunities to provide feedback and thoughts. So if it gets a little redundant, we apologize, but that's part of the process, to try to make sure that we're getting all of our bases covered. So we will start to jump in just with voter registration. Carol, if you can bring up the slides.
Were you able to see my screen, and? Oh, okay.
I think we got it right here.
Okay, listen. Me actually. Sorry, y'all. Let me make sure it's showing the right screen. One moment. Does that look right to you, and?
Not seeing anything yet.
All right. Apologies for the issues, y'all. I don't know why. Okay, apologies, Anne. Let me troubleshoot one more thing. Should be able to see it now. Is that right?
There we go. Thanks,
Okay.
Carol. All right, so this is the location of the administrative rule that we'll be talking about. So Oregon motor voter registration. We'll move on to the next slide where we just talk where it all begins. Who are those folks that are qualified to be included in the Oregon motor voter process? So we have three categories, 3 qualifications that somebody must meet. They must be a United States citizen, at least 16 years old, and an Oregon resident. So as we were talking about these particular qualifications, there were multiple information requests that we had come up with over the last couple weeks to talk about how we can ensure that only these folks that are qualified are being included in the Oregon motor voter process. And so I think where we could start is talking about this U.S. citizen qualification. We had asked last week about what documents that the DMV accepts for proof of citizenship and proof of legal residence. And Kat was kind enough to gather those together. So I was hoping that we could pass it over to Kat and she'd be willing to kind of walk us through what those documents are, maybe also touch on that legal presence indicator, how those documents inform the legal presence indicator that gets marked on the file. Yeah. Does that work, Kat?
I didn't have that part ready because I was told to have the address sources ready.
Oh, okay.
I do have the information. It's just
well, let's start with addresses. That's fine.
Yet.
That's also on the screen if you're ready for that.
For the addresses?
Yeah, because
okay.
I mean that's one of the main qualifications here is Oregon resident, and so we want to be able to educate the group about how we're confirming that residence and where those sources are coming from.
Okay, I can do that. All right, so I have a list. Is this legible for everybody?
Yes, looks good to me.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So I have a list essentially of a lot of forms or reports that the DMV processes where we could have a customer update their address. And I'll go through them, and then I have the actual forms themselves. And we can, think about if we want to change anything in the forms, but also I think it might, because there's a lot of these, we might consider just what data we're interested in and what sounds most relevant in terms of voter registration. And because these span a lot of different topics and a lot of reasons that someone might be filling them out. So the first would be the most intentional, which is a customer filling out their online address change, and that's done by DMV2U. And then the second would be calling on the phone, and they might be calling about something else, but they might also update their address, and they do have to go through some security questions, both online and on the phone, to do that, to prove that it's them calling. And then the third way would be in a field office. They might be renewing their license, or getting a replacement, and then they go through the requirement of residence address. So those first three are pretty customer, very direct by the customer, and they're very aware that they're updating their address, I would say, in those transactions. The others, they are filling out various forms, and address is included, and I would say it's not as maybe obvious to them that they might be updating their address. So that's something to think about as we look through them. So we have some registration paperwork and vehicle title, registration renewal, disability placard applications, hardship permit applications, valid with previous photo applications is essentially if they're out of state or something and they need an updated credential and they can't come physically into DMV. And then accident and insurance reports. So those are all done by the customer, and they sign at the end of those forms. And then the last one is done on behalf of the customer, typically at vehicle dealerships, and that's the electronic vehicle registration. So that is one that, they usually are asking the customer, but a mistake could definitely happen there. And we currently don't have that in the change of address file for that reason, because it's not done directly by the customer. So that's the list, and then I will go through kind of what those look like.
Yeah,
so
Kat, if I
yeah.
could hold you for just a second, because I see David had his hands up, and that's probably relevant.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. This is for both new registrations and for updates to existing registrations, correct?
Yes.
Does it include feedback from the Postal Service? In other words, some returned mail or something of the like?
When we enter it, we can see if USPS accepts it or if they would like to change the formatting at all.
So there might be two kinds of feedback then from Postal Service, right? One, when you enter it initially, another might be an actual returned piece of mail, which probably gets to the Tracy might be able to help on this, to the local the county election office most likely. I'm wondering if that's included on this list, or if that's something somehow viewed as separate.
It sounds like that would probably be separate. So I think Kat mentioned this last time, that there was at least one part of USPS verification. I don't know if that was the CAS certification to try to find matching addresses within USPS. But I think to your broader question, David, is any returned election mail is part of the voter registration process that is done by the county clerks, by the local election officials, included in. That's part of the regular list maintenance that we're doing, so it's not specific to OMV, but any official election mail that's sent to those voters that are returned back would be processed by the county clerk. They also do the national change of address system at least monthly, but that's part of the regular voter registration list maintenance.
Okay,
Michelle,
thanks.
yeah, thank you for your question. Michelle, you have a hand up.
I also wanted to state that if we had return mail, like with a forwarding, because they don't forward mail. If you do a forwarding address with the post office, it still comes back. We don't update an address because we got a notification of a forwarding address. I think that might have been a part of the question, so I just wanted to clarify that I know of. I don't believe that we will update it just because we got notification of a forwarding address at the DMV side.
Thank you, Michelle, for that
Could
clarification.
I follow up on that then? Does that trigger any kind of follow-up to the voter at that point, even if it doesn't automatically trigger an update to the voter registration?
I was stating at DMV. So say somebody comes in, they change their address, and then we get a notification that there's a forwarding address at the DMV. We do not then go into their system and update the address based off of that notification of a forwarding address, because we didn't get direct notification from the customer.
But I would add, David, on the county side, we're receiving information from the from DMV that says, hey, this voter's address has been updated. And so the counties are going to update it. Then the counties are going to send the voter notification card, which then if that comes back as undeliverable, will trigger the NVRA process. So, but my kind of spidey senses went up to thinking like, oh, I didn't know that the DMV sent a non-forwardable piece of mail. So they're also getting that information from the post office in advance. So I appreciate that. My brain is going, how could we utilize that data and maybe potentially save some information on the back end? Everyone is going to be mailing something, and clerks will be taking action if it comes back as undeliverable on their watch.
Yeah, Dina, that's exactly what I was getting at, that there is these are multiple inputs.
Yep.
And they might vary in terms of degree of credibility. And I think it's quite appropriate to focus on the things first that come directly from the voter. Postal Service is probably really credible. And one of the huge advantages Oregon has is you are getting so much constant mail feedback. I totally agree. You probably shouldn't automatically necessarily think that it's all correct, but it's important feedback, and it's probably going to be pretty high quality data.
Great. Okay. So I'll go through a few of our forms and processes where someone can update their address. So the first one's the customer going online, and they go through a few questions to prove who they are, and then enter an address for residents. And as you can see, I've blocked out the actual address, but there's two different options. One's that's USPS verified and essentially matches the formatting that USPS has in their system. And they can enter a different address that's not USPS verified. That does happen occasionally where folks just say, this address says Tigard, but I actually live in Portland and I know that USPS messes this up. So I'm going to write what I know to be correct or what I believe to be correct. So that is one difference that we have. We do allow people to overwrite that, and DMV staff can overwrite it in the office too if the customer's insistent that it's correct a certain way, and especially the way it's on their actual proof of address. So that's something to note. And then we do, on the next section, have an option for them to say they can put a mailing address as well. And differentiate between those two, but they are asked explicitly about their voter registration, and the wordings may be a little bit confusing, but essentially, would you like to opt out, or do you want Secretary of State to use this new address that you are submitting to DMV?
Yeah,
Yes,
Dina, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Kat, thank you so much for these screenshots. I mentioned in the last meeting, I'm such like a visual learner. So this is really helpful. This is where last week we were talking about, is there any way, this is a bit misleading because we're saying, would you like to opt out of sending this change of address to the Secretary of State for registration purposes? But when we dug deeper last week in our discussion, we learned that this address change is still going to be on the DMV master list that is provided to Eric, which then still trickles down to counties for list maintenance purposes. So even if a person says, no, I don't want this to update my voter registration, it's not going to be transferred through the OMV process, but it is getting transferred through the list maintenance process and the relationship with Eric. So there is an opportunity here to add some additional language or to figure out if they're saying, no, I don't want this, to also withhold it from the master list or to add a flag on the master list that's sent to Eric that don't change this address. But I'm so pleased at this conversation as we dig down and drill down into these processes that we learned like, oh, there's a downstream effect here we need to address. So I wanted to prompt that to the group. Would we want to add language on this page? Is this page even necessary if they don't really have a choice if they want to opt out because it's getting updated through Eric? Just wanted to flag right while we're on the screen that discussion or prompt folks.
Thanks, Dina, for bringing that up.
I'll just try. First of all, Dina, really good flag. That's like incredibly important to be thinking along those lines. And I'm always in favor of getting rid of extraneous screens that are unnecessary. One of the things that I think is misunderstood about Eric by a lot of folks who probably aren't as familiar with it as you are, Dina, is that Eric can only report out what it takes in, right? So it's taking in data on addresses from a variety of sources, the most prominent being each member state's voter registration record and their DMV record. And hopefully those two things match within a given state. And if it reports something out to Eric, it's probably, if Eric's reporting something out to Oregon, it's probably most likely coming from the DMV record of another state because that's most up to date, and that's very high quality data as long as states don't input vehicle registration addresses, only input actual licensing addresses onto those. If Dina, that might be, I don't know, that might be a query you even want to run to see if I don't know if you have someone who can do this, it might be a bigger deal than I'd suggest, but you could look at what the Eric reports are sending you and what you're getting through this screen and see if there's a pretty much direct one-to-one overlap. In which case, to your point, yeah, it'd be great to get rid of the screen.
From the DMV side, thank you, David, for that. From the DMV side is the expectation is if the voter says no, then we're excluding this change of address from the OMV process. So the address change is just not being transmitted to the DMV or being made available for pickup from the DMV, from the SOS. That's the expectation that, that's what this screen is doing. Yes, okay.
And yeah, we have discovered through digging in that our, sort of double checks to help maintain data on voter rolls is interfering with this because it essentially is taking a snapshot of what we have at DMV, and that would include this address when you're doing those weekly sort of checks at the data. So yeah, I do wonder if we can, this is something, we've been thinking about for a little bit now on how to make sure that if someone does opt out, that it actually happens. And so I do think it's a bit of tech work, but in my mind, that's the ideal so that people can distinguish between those two addresses because maybe they really don't want their voter registration associated with the business they're doing at DMV because it just feels totally separate. Yeah, that's my thought.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kat. Yeah, so I'm hearing some consensus from the group that I mean, this warrants further discussion, probably more along the lines of how we process ERIC data. So I think it's getting a little bit out of scope of the RAC, but it's a good discussion for us all to have to understand the downstream effects of this voter registration. Anything else we want to touch on this before Kat continues? Okay, thanks, Kat.
No problem. All right, so our next, now we'll go through a bunch of forms and it's a little overwhelming, so let me know if I need to pause here, but here's just one of the forms someone could fill out that happens to include address update. So there's, normal demographic information, and then we do have residence address. We give folks an opportunity to have a temporary mailing address too. Because often this particular application is coming from people who are not in Oregon at the moment, but they need to get an updated card, so they can't come in for a new photo or signature. Their card has to be valid within the last 9 years in order to qualify for this. And there are some online renewals now that can replace this. Because we've, especially since COVID, have given a few more options for people who may not be able to come in person. So that's one opportunity for, if we receive this, we will update their DMV profile to match this residence address. And the temporary mailing won't change their mailing address on file at DMV. Do you have any questions on that form?
Yeah, Dina.
Yeah, thank you. Yes. What I heard you say at the end is that the temporary mailing address won't affect the mailing address that's on the record. And the form is a little bit confusing to me. The temporary / mailing address is confusing. Is it one or the other? So I have not been on the recipient side at the local level processing the information. So I'm not, I think it would be helpful, Tracy or Ann, to describe, like, for OMB, when there's a change to an address or mailing address. So this is specific just to address updates for someone that's already registered. Is the mailing address coming over, and or if somebody entered a temporary mailing address, how would counties know that it's just temporary? So maybe very, not sure if there's anything at all, but I thought this is a good opportunity to answer that question.
Yeah, thanks for posing that, Dina. And Tracy, feel free to jump in. From memory, I do remember seeing address changes come through that sometimes would say temporary address, which was just a flag to the voter registration clerks that they can reject that transaction because it's not good information going forward. It's just the temporary. Anything to add, Tracy?
Yes. Also, if it comes over and the residence address hasn't changed, mailing address has, it's kind of can be a red flag for us depending on what that mailing address has changed to. If it changed to another state, we may go, well, we need to contact this voter a little more to figure out, really, is this where they want their ballot going, or is this just for the DMV stuff? And sometimes we'll get some that are just a mailing address change, and those, of course, we don't process. We inactivate the voter because we don't know if their residence address has changed or not. So I'm not sure how the data is sent from DMV if there is no residence address change and it's just a mailing address change. Because those will, we're supposed to stop and not process those without a residence address as well. Because we don't know if they're both changing or staying the same or what. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does make sense. So I think the extra bit of clarification that we need to provide is when it's just a mailing address that's changing, are we still getting the residence address confirmed by DMV when it comes over? Because that's what the clerks need, is that the residence address is confirmed as well as the mailing. If it's just the mailing that's changing, there's not enough evidence there. Michelle?
So I just want to make sure I was understanding that. You receive notification that doesn't show a residential address at all. It just shows a mailing.
Yes, but I'm not sure if it's just strictly the DMV, OMB, ADR. We get it from so many places. Sometimes I can't remember which one shows it that way sometimes. But yes,
just on the
sometimes we'll
DMV
get that.
side, I'm just thinking for myself, like there's nothing I can do if I don't have a residential address. I can't process any transaction. Like
Okay. So if they just send this in and it's the same though, the same residence,
it would show as
different?
residential only. It wouldn't show a mailing. Like we're not able to process if residential field is not filled out. Like the system won't let us. That I have ever seen since Oliver came up on.
Yeah, I'm wondering if maybe it's the change of address file, and maybe that only shows changes and not reconfirming the current.
That could be,
Yeah.
yes.
Maybe with the post office, USPS, if they're just changing their mailing address, then I could see that on their side.
And I have not seen any temporary ones for a very long time coming from DMV. Anything saying temporary address. I think that's kind of gone away.
Yeah,
We
Tracy,
use
I
temporary-
appreciate you saying that, because that was filtered out because those with temporary addresses are supposed to be filtered out of the system. So you shouldn't have seen those updates for a long time. And Dina, I see your hand held up, so I'll get to you in a second. But I do know that the NCOA transfers that come over in for voter registration purposes, more often than DMV, will only have the mailing address, and that's where you'll need that extra notification to the voter and that extra investigator to get that evidence. I believe, and I'll confirm this, but I believe that the way that the data is transferred from DMV to us for address changes is we are getting the residence address every time, as well as a mailing address. So we should be getting both anytime there's an address change from DMV. Dina? You're muted.
Oh yeah, thanks, Everett. Really appreciate the discussion. The one thing then I come back to is what raised the question for me is when a person is filling out this form, like is there real estate to have a mailing address and then a temporary mailing address? Because it feels like it's the same thing. And if temporary mailing addresses are not coming over on the OMV file, that's the part here where I'm just a little bit confused about. If a person fills in something in this, the temporary / mailing address, if different from residence address, does DMV consider it a temporary address or a mailing address? Or maybe I'm getting too far into the weeds here, but I want to walk away from this session knowing exactly like what data is being transmitted and how to understand these forms since you went through the effort of sharing them. So is this considered a temporary address or a mailing?
I believe this one's temporary because in order to even qualify for this, you have to prove that you can't come in for whatever reason. You're probably not even in Oregon. So it's considered temporary as an option for us to mail, your updated credential, but beyond that, it's not going to be used. It sounds like it's being filtered out on the SOS side.
So that raises a question for me, because we've been talking about the voter registration opt-out still being updated in the master file, in the HAVA file. So it does sound like there is a way for DMV to maintain another address, a temporary address, without updating that individual's main address on file.
Yeah, that's my understanding, is that we have residence and then mailing, and I don't think we send the temporary mailing to you because it's supposed to be for just DMV business use. That would be my understanding, but I need to check with our tech folks to confirm, but I don't think we ever send you 3 addresses. So
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen 3 either, but I guess where I'm getting to is as we're talking about these address sources, it feels like the consensus from the group is that anything that the voter initiates, that the voter knows is going to change their address, we want that information transferred to the clerks in a timely basis. But there's other data like vehicle registrations, which is updating that individual's address at DMV, that we don't believe we want coming over for voter registration purposes. And so it's like, how do we filter that data out? Is there a way to filter it out, or is it always going to get updated through the ERIC data process? So more just thinking out loud and trying to ask those questions. But that's what I'm trying to keep in mind as we're looking at these different forms, is how we're able to isolate this data for voter registration purposes. Tracy?
Yes, I was just noticing the box right above it. It says the mailing address listed on this application will be the mailing address on record with DMV. All DMV notices and other business transactions will be mailed to the address listed. That's kind of confusing. So is it the residence address listed or the mailing address listed? And then it almost seems like you're going to change it no matter what, the mailing address, whether it being a temporary or not. So I'm just a little confusing on my and as a person filling out this form too. It's like,
Michelle?
Okay, so when it comes to the temporary / mailing address, what that is where do you want this credential specifically mailed? But in order for us to process that, it has to go into the DMV system in order for it to get mailed to that address. The reason it says temporary / mailing is through conversations that we've had with customers where at this very moment, it's a temporary address and that's where they want it mailed. And sometimes it's a residential address, not a like PO box or something to that effect. When they get back is when they would want to then update it so that if there was any correspondence that needed to happen between them putting in this application and them coming back, we have that mailing address on file. And that's for law enforcement, for voter registration, that's for any correspondence with us as well. I think that's why it says temporary / mailing, because we have to be very specific as to their residential address is not changing, right? They consider them still a resident of Oregon, but maybe they're in the military and they're stationed in New York for the next 3 years. They still want all of their stuff to come to New York, but they are still considered a resident of Oregon.
okay, let me check with our programs and our tech on how we process this one in particular, because there's another form that's has a one-time mailing temporary address too. So those are, I think we do have room for the 3 distinct addresses in our system. So I'm not sure how this one, I'm not a super common form, I don't think, but I'm not sure how it will trickle down to Secretary of State, or if it is. But it sounds like this one is because it ends up changing their profile. But I'll double check that that's true.
Yeah, I think we're good to keep going through the forms, Kat.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right, this is a continuation of the same form. And then we get to the accident report or traffic collision and insurance report. This one's really long. There's lots of information. Sorry if you've ever had to fill this out. It's not fun. So the first section here starts with some information about the location of the accident, and then we get to the driver information. And here's where we have residence address and mailing address again. And we only change the address, I was told, if that box is checked. So if that box is not checked, we're not updating the address for this section. Do we have any questions coming up for this? I would just note that there's a bunch of information too about the other folks involved. And I did double check that we aren't changing addresses based on any of this information. This would be just verifying who someone is, or maybe if there's an out of state driver that we are kind of creating a profile for them. But otherwise, you know, Oregon resident, we're not updating their address based on someone else's information. This is all still that same form. And then we get to the title and registration. And we have residence and mailing again. And
this
then,
also has the one time.
yep. And so people forget that this is an option. Either they don't see it, or, you know, sometimes at the DMV, they forget to tell the field office that they would like their information this one time mailed to a different address. So sometimes they'll put mailing, the customer will indicate a one-time mailing address that then ends up staying on their record. But most of the time, that is good information for us from this form. And then also vehicle address if they want their vehicle to be at a different address. And again, I think there's a lot of customers may not realize that we have these different distinctions that they can make on their record, and they may think, oh, I want my vehicle at this address, I'm going to put it in my residence address. So I do think there's some confusion that can happen with these forms. Any questions on that one?
Yeah, Kat, I have a quick question. Is this a form that is only going to be filled out by an individual, or is this one that a vehicle dealer might be filling out for an individual?
I believe this is the one that, so this particular one online at DMV, the customer can fill out. I think that the electronic vehicle registration that the dealers fill out is essentially this information, but done at the dealership. And so I think a lot of the times the dealers are essentially providing this information for the customer, but some customers want to do it themselves, or maybe the dealership doesn't offer it to them. So that would be how they process it if the customer does it themselves.
Okay, so I guess where I'm getting to with that is this form looks very confusing. And as you said, if somebody's trying to register their address or vehicle at a different address, they could very easily change their personal information based on this form. And then following that thought, a dealer filling this form out for an individual in front of them purchasing a vehicle could easily change their residence address because they didn't know which field to fill out. So that's what I could see from this. Dina?
Yeah, thank you. Just to add, I just went through this process in purchasing a vehicle, and the dealer presented it typed out nice and neat and just said, please verify your address and sign. And being an election official, I didn't even think about the fact. I just looked, buying a vehicle is stressful, and going through this last bit of it, you're just like dying to get out the door after going through a lot of the discussion. So as we think through, it just happened to me where I just was like, yep, my address is correct, and signed off on it, not knowing how this affects my voter registration. So I appreciate the discussion as we go forward. Like, is there an opportunity just for us to exclude vehicle address changes, or do we go down the path of all of these lists that you provided for us, Kat, where these forms are coming in, creating some sort of a handout or a requirement for any person that has the ability to affect a change of a voter's address required to make a statement or provide a handout of some sort that's like, hey, did you know that the transaction that you did today is going to affect your voter registration? Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I think seeing that long list, and thinking about the amount of education that would require, and kind of disclaimers and language. It is possible, but I think it would probably be more reliable to figure out how we can control the data on our side at DMV and Secretary of State. So I think that is definitely something for us to pursue and see how logistically possible it is to kind of separate out those data fields, which right now I know is not really happening in our system, but I think it's possible. This is the same form, I believe, or no, okay, we got the top here, our hardship permit application. So this is typically, and Michelle can help me if I'm wrong, but if someone has a suspended license and they say, I need my driving privileges for very specific things like work, I can't work without a car. So they can fill out this application. And in that, we have residence and mailing again. And then we do have worksite address. So that's another address that is on this form. That's optional. And we do have physician name and physician address if there's a medical component to the hardship application, and the applicant signs at the bottom. And at all of these, there is a signature that they are attesting that the information is accurate. And this one is another registration renewal or replacement. It's very similar to the title and registration, but more for if someone needs to update their stickers typically. So residence, mailing, one-time mailing, vehicle address.
Pat, do you mind touching on for lines 7 and 8? Because I see that the joint owners could be
Yes.
listed that might affect address changes.
Yeah, so if people want to be listed as a joint owner, we can put their names there. But the address change, I can show you the instructions, but it essentially says, we're not changing your address if you are listed as a joint owner of this vehicle. We're only changing the address of the person who is saying that they're the primary owner. So we've heard anecdotally sometimes that people's whole families' addresses change, and with sales of vehicles and things like that. It really shouldn't be happening, at least on the DMV end. We are not updating the joint owners' addresses. So folks, if they would like to change their address, so here's the information they can see if they're the joint owner. So essentially saying that person who's listed as owner on line 5, we're going to update your address here. Additional owners can change their address separately.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah. Okay, now we are at the disabled person parking permit. So residence and mailing, we have this checkbox here that asks if they're new. So we don't update it unless they check that box. And then the applicant signs. And I think, Michelle, you were mentioning that sometimes the physician might be filling out some of this form for the, or maybe a family member too, if somebody has a disability.
Yeah.
It just depends on the type. Yeah. But they do
So-
sign, the applicant should sign.
So there's a couple of caveats to that. One is if it's an original issuance, We just need the certification of disability signed by the physician. But we do not change address for the recipient unless it's checkmarked for new and there's a signature from the applicant that they are wanting to change their address essentially. We do not require the applicant to be the one to fill out the form because disabilities come in all forms. So it may be a minor that can't write. It could be somebody who is unable to physically write their information, so they have a caregiver or a relative doing that for them, but their signature would be needed for that address change.
All right, and I believe that's the last one. Yep. All right, so the only other then source of addresses that we've discussed is when the vehicle dealership submits the information on behalf of the customer. So that information is caught on that form, but they have a, you know, electronic process that they can do that where they fill it out online and send it over to us, and aren't using necessarily that application printed out and mailed. That is one way to do it, but there's also the electronic vehicle registration process.
Thank you, Kat, for going through that. It's really, really helpful for Dina and I to get to understand all these different sources as we're getting ready to actually promulgate the rules and write the rules. Because I think going back to something that I think it was David that said a couple weeks ago, like the vehicle registration data doesn't meet the same standards of integrity that we want for voter registration. And so it's a best practice to be able to filter that out. And I think going through all these forms is very helpful for us to see how many different avenues an individual has an opportunity to update their address from DMV, and how important it's going to be for us to figure out how to parse this data correctly so that we're getting addresses from the voter to update the voter's address. And then there's still, I think, further downstream effects that we're going to have to figure out, because there's so many ways for an individual to interact with DMV and to have their address updated. Okay, so if we can, I think if we jump back to the slides, we can kind of review. I mean, that discussion, it was really helpful. It was also a little squishy with where we were, because we were talking about address changes as a whole, not just covered transactions. So not just like OMV issuance. So that's not just for new voters. New voters are the specific category that has to be only issuances, essentially only a new renewal or a replacement of a license or a permit. So those are only for the new voters. But we are updating data from all of the existing voters in the registration file. So it was a good conversation for us to have. But jumping back here, Carol, let's go ahead and advance to the next slide. Yeah, so this is where I was talking about we're talking about two separate streams. So the address changes really affect all voters, new and existing, but for the OMV process, for the automatic voter registration, it's only going to be those that are applying for a license, permit, ID card, renewing, or getting a replacement. Here are some of the individuals that we've already identified as those that are excluded from this process. So those that don't meet qualifications, participants that are in the DOJ address confidentiality program, and then multiple individuals who essentially are not providing their residence address or a signature. I think those are the two main things that all of these folks would fall into: not providing a verifiable residence address and a signature. So process level, we haven't touched on this yet again today, so it's been a couple weeks since this discussion. But one of the things that we had highlighted was how confusing this process can be for everyone. And so as part of our proposed rules, we were proposing that during a cover transaction, DMV technicians inform qualified individuals that their information will be sent to the Secretary of State for voter registration, provide a document explaining the OMV process, the timeline, registration deadlines. The Secretary of State would be responsible for the information in that explainer document and would be reviewing it annually. DMV would ensure that that document is available and presented to qualified OMV registrants. And then if a transaction was occurring within 30 days of a registration deadline, DMV must offer electronic or paper registration. Were there any thoughts, any feedback, anything that we've missed on this particular section? Because it's been I don't think we talked about this last week. Kat.
Yeah, I think after discussing this a little more and reflecting on what it would mean at DMV to present or inform the qualified individuals, having like that brochure or handout, I think is the best option, and avoiding adding talking points, because that tends to, with customers, just lead to more questions that the field staff shouldn't be answering. So having the handout available, I think, is the best option. And then I don't think I brought this up at the last one because we hadn't thought of it yet, but another option for having the customer be aware that it's happening is during the transaction, we have them confirm, we turn the desktop towards the customer and say, can you confirm that this information is correct? Because it will be, a lot of it is going to be on their credential. So it includes their address, their like security questions, their name, their date of birth. And we could add on there, you will be registered to vote, some language around that, and that you can opt out with the Secretary of State. But I think that would be a high chance that the customer would actually read it, as opposed to other places that we might, have a written notification because they have to go through and agree that what they see on the screen is correct. And so I think that is another option, besides just having a handout too.
Thanks, Kat. So I guess a clarifying question, you were saying potentially adding it to the disclosures that they're signing or verifying. Was that correct?
So the disclosures are on the pin pad, and that's more like, I attest that I'm able to drive. I'm not going to drive under the influence, things like that. And people, I think Michelle can let us know, but I think people tend to just kind of scroll through and just sign those. They don't really read it. Whereas that transaction review, we really ask them to be sure that they're double checking. And, if anything's wrong on that screen, we start over and re-enter the information. Like if someone says, that's not my address, you messed up, we go back to the beginning of the transaction and make sure it's corrected. So yeah, Michelle, do you have any thoughts on disclosure versus the transaction in terms of,
Yeah, so on the disclosures at the end of the transaction that they're actually reading and signing to or attesting to, we do talk about different things like your address. If you change your address, your information's not going to get your credential not going to be forwarded. It's also the implied consent section as well for the customer, which you're attesting that you don't drive under the influence of inhalants, alcohol, or psilocybins, basically. People usually just scroll yes. There's not a lot of deep reading into that. There are some, because we do have people that do it, which is fine. We always give them the time that they want. The screen's turn is a verification of information to make sure that I entered everything correctly. It takes up the whole screen. It's facing them. They take as much time as they want to. We make sure that it is accurate. Like, that is the purpose, is to make sure that it's accurate. So it's a lot there's a little bit more emphasis on making sure that I got your name spelled correctly and I got your address spelled in there correctly, and you don't have a mailing address, or you do, or your date of birth is correct. So that if we could get a blip on there that says this information is going to be sent to the Secretary of State for motor voter registration. If you have any questions, contact Secretary of State. We could probably add it there. Or it's just really how much emphasis do you want? Do you want a scroll and tap and agree and a signature that yes, you knew? Or do you, because that's all verbal, right? When I turn the screen, it's verbal. So there's not an acknowledgement from the voter, like that I can say, like I have a signature saying that that is all correct. Except for in the disclosure, it says all my information is true and accurate.
Yeah, this is a really helpful conversation, because I appreciate the thought being put into where are we actually informing the voter. Because if it's just in a list of a dozen other disclosures that they're signing, maybe that's not the most impactful. But if it is on the screen that they're reviewing for accuracy, that sounds like an excellent idea to me. So I appreciate the thought being put into that. I will add, just for everybody watching, David entered into the chat just on this particular slide that this is an excellent list, because those viewing at home don't have access to the chat. I just wanted to read that out loud so you're not missing anything that we are seeing. Kat.
If you're interested, I can show you what the transaction looks like. I have it pulled up, or a sample of it. So it has a watermark on it. It makes it a little hard to read, but
I think that would be very helpful for us to see.
Okay. All right, so you can see this is essentially what they're looking at. They're reviewing their demographics and seeing that everything's spelled correctly, accurate, some details on their license, and maybe at the bottom here we could have some language about voter registration, or something hopefully brief but pretty clear that they're going to be sent, their information is going to be sent to Secretary of State for registration.
Yeah, that's excellent. It seems like an ideal location that's accomplishing the purposes that we're asking for. This is when somebody's reviewing their information for DMV. This is where they can get that notification that their information would be included in the Oregon Motor Voter Program. This would also, I believe, save the concern about having specific conversations with the voter about voting. I guess the other thing that we didn't touch on yet today, but was requested, or at least asked about previously, was the opt-out in person. So again, just clarifying for everyone that Oregon state law does not allow an opt-out process to happen at DMV. So we are relying on good notification for those individuals that are being included in the process. And I believe that just viewing that in the transaction review, if they viewed a disclaimer, that would probably satisfy those purposes. It'd be much better than the current state, I would say. Dina.
Thank you. One question, is there a way that the technician at the DMV at this part of the process, when you're turning the screen and asking for them to sign off or to verify that everything is correct, will the TSR at that time know whether or not this is a qualified individual? I'm wondering about the confusion. Only qualified individuals who have had their citizenship, their age, and that they live in Oregon are included in the Oregon motor voter process. So wondering if that statement that we're asking them to review, which is also a great time to hand them the brochure that says this, here's the Oregon motor voter. Is there a way that transaction will that statement will only live there for qualified individuals, and that it won't exist for non-qualified individuals.
Michelle?
So from the tech side, I don't do the back side of the programming of what gets pulled up onto that form, but I'm pretty sure that we can make it so that it's only tied to a C, which is that citizen designation, which only comes through if they're proving that. There is the secondary, the electronic, not the organ motor voter automatic, but at the end of a transaction before that screen is pulled, they do have the opportunity to electronically sign up if they're showing documents that present a non-citizen. So like if they're bringing their out-of-state driver's license and their proof of address for standard issue, that will pop up. I wouldn't want that to come through for that side because we haven't verified and the Secretary of State hasn't verified citizenship off of that request, that electronic version versus the automatic version. So I think that we'd have to work with the techs on the backside to make sure that that only comes through with a C designation or citizen designation.
Yeah, but yeah, it wouldn't, we wouldn't leave it up to the text to decide at the moment. They don't produce that sheet, right?
When I say tech, I don't mean the TSR. When I say tech, I mean like the backside, the people that are actually creating the maintenance on the technical side, right? On the software and the programming side, whoever does the programming would have to make it so that it only pulls through with a C.
Yes, so the TSR wouldn't be making any decision at the moment. It's automatically done for them. Yeah.
Right. But that would have already been determined prior to us turning that screen, because that is literally our last step before processing payment.
Thank you. Yeah, that's very helpful. So the Oliver system, so just to summarize, to make sure we're all on the same page, the Oliver system, depending on what type of documentation has been presented before, already has that information, whether they're qualified. By the time they get to that review screen, we would know that they meet all their qualifications, that their file would be included in the Oregon Motor Voter file. And so that's where we could provide that disclaimer. And like Dina said, probably an excellent opportunity to present the documentation that then describes the opt-out process and the party selection process that will happen through the Secretary of State's office. Great. Uli?
Thank you. What I'm understanding, I know folks might not be aware of the technology, but is there any possibility that this disclaimer message that would be automatically generated by anyone that's already been classified as C could like falsely pop up? So someone who isn't a C gets designated a C and they get this message. That's a big concern of mine right now. False C's popping up, false citizenship popping up. Sort of what kind of safety measures could be in place. I think that's a really big ask of technology, maybe. That's a really big thing to rely on for technology.
Yeah, we do a lot of testing with our system. And because it's, we're responsible for credentials of all Oregonians, it's a very robust process when we go through our development and testing. And sometimes it takes a long time. So yes, it would be a programming process and would take some time, but we could make it so that only C's, only date of birth, this range is presented with that notification. The only other outstanding issue is if someone had been designated a C in error, and but that they would be going in that file in error as well. So that's a larger concern. So I think, in our broader discussion about how we're going to try to protect the data of what we're sending in OMV. I think that can be part of that conversation, because maybe we don't want to just have NEC. Maybe it's a really specific criteria that we're sending in OMV. So as we are finishing that discussion, we can think about what the development then would look like to notify individuals.
Well, I see, David, I see your hand up. We'll get to you in just a second. I think this is a really important point that we touch on, because currently these individuals that potentially could have a false C flag are not seeing any sort of identification, not seeing any sort of information that's saying that their file is included. And so if we get the information correct, it is giving that individual a chance to see the screen and go, oh, I'm actually not, I'm not qualified. I'm not included in this. And it would give them a chance to speak up and correct the record if we have that additional information included, which currently we do not. So we're talking about adding a safeguard, adding extra information, adding that review process so the individual could help catch any of those false positives. David.
Thanks. Just so I'm clear, when we talk about coding someone as a C, we're talking about coding them as a citizen, correct? All right. And is that, so I have a couple questions. First of all, when someone presents a US birth certificate or a naturalization certificate or a passport, there is no ambiguity about citizenship status, correct? That should clearly be automatically coded. Am I right about that? Anyone know? I'm kind of wondering what
Yes.
the process is. Yeah. I mean, is that at the clerk's discretion at the DMV, or is that happening? Is that happening when for instance, how are the documents that one shows at DMV? And forgive me if this is already discussed, but I notice having gone to a lot of DMVs, this is often just something that is kind of glossed over. I show up at DMV, I'm bringing documents relevant to my transaction, and one of them is proof of legal presence. And for US citizens, it is probably, DMV people could tell me if I'm wrong, but in my experience, it's most commonly a birth certificate, US birth certificate. Passport can be very common too, but that usually was gotten with a US birth certificate in the first place. And then sometimes a naturalization certificate. Shouldn't that be an automatic process at that point, that the C automatically gets coded into the citizen's file?
It does.
Okay.
So
No discretion on the part of the clerk.
No. So we have to enter in what we see. So if somebody is presenting a clerk, TSR with one of those documents, we have to enter it into Oliver, which is our system that she kind of showed you. We have to, and it is broken down into US legal present or citizenship. I'm going to pull up Oliver, sorry, so I can make sure I'm getting the wording right. Give me just a second. We actually have it broken down into stuff that show that it's coming through as a citizen versus a non-citizen. So we can't accidentally grab a US birth certificate when they're showing us a foreign birth certificate. And then depending on what we enter that we saw depends on what Oliver designates as their legal presence status, whether that's a citizen or permanent resident, or like unconfirmed, which are unknown, which is an N.
And I know Anne was prompting me about this earlier about all the LP indicators. I do have that information pulled up now and ready to present if we do want to go through that now. I don't know if this is the right time, but let me know.
And along these lines, if I just had a general question, this might be an easy answer. Is the document that the customer shows you actually stored itself within the DMV database, like a copy of the US birth certificate?
No.
Okay.
No, only for Real ID transactions, not for our standard, and that's a state policy.
Oh, wait. But for Real ID transactions, a copy of the document is in fact stored within it, and a digitized copy is appended to the individual's record.
It is a part of the file, yes, but we can't, like, I can't go pull that up later. It is part of the federal holding of the document. It's not something that I could then go look at later as a TSR to verify.
Okay.
Our program staff can though, so we have it just
yeah,
very, very secure who can see
Yeah,
So
it.
very secure.
there are state staff who can access that if there's a circumstance where there's some ambiguity or something uncertain that you want to confirm.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
So Kat, to your previous question, do you have the document list that proves citizenship?
Yes.
Okay, I think that would be helpful to go over those documents because that's the verification that's being done. That's determining whether they get the C legal presence. I don't know that it's going to be super helpful for the group to go through all of the other legal presence indicators because really we're only focused on those that fall into that C citizenship bucket because those are the only folks that are being included in the Oregon motor voter process. So yeah, if you can go through this, I think that would be helpful. Ulysses, do you have a question pertaining?
Yeah, just I needed a
please.
quick refresher too. So if I remember correctly, from one of our last meetings, we were saying that whatever document gets handed to a DMV official needs to be given a second look by someone else, and they sign off saying this is the document that was presented. And then that also gets verified through the corresponding agency that needs to verify that document, correct?
Yes, so for Real ID, we do the third-party verification like with a passport. If someone gives us a passport, we will run it through the USPAVS system that verifies passports to show that they're active. And we do the second check on all documents establishing legal presence, regardless of if it's standard or Real ID. Yes, so we don't necessarily, for just a standard transaction, we wouldn't necessarily run a passport or other documents through the system. We do use that occasionally just to double check, but it's not part of the standard process.
Okay.
Because it costs money every time we run it.
Okay, and then that was going to lead to my second question. When does someone get designated as C, just upon looking at their documents or like once their documents have been verified?
So for Real ID, we won't issue their credential unless it is verified through the third-party systems. But for standard, if they present their documents, we get the second check, see that it's entered correctly. That will automatically populate the correct indicator based on what documents were entered. So the TSR isn't looking at the documents and saying, oh, that person's a citizen. The system is doing it for them.
Okay.
All right, so for the list of documents that can populate a C indicator, we have, so it looks really long, but essentially birth document or birth certificate, passport or passport card, certificate of citizenship, certificate of naturalization, consular report of birth abroad, certification of report of birth. Some of these are less common. And request for verification of birth, ID of a resident citizen. Like some of these aren't even produced anymore, but it's older documents that someone might bring in. And then any of these the 9 federally recognized tribes of Oregon, you could bring in your tribal card and that will produce a citizenship indicator.
Great. So Pat, my question would be with this, because as we're writing the rules, we would like to probably point to where this documentation is formalized. Is this out of a field guide? Is this adopted by rule? Is there a way that we can point to the list of acceptable documents that prove citizenship?
I think it's not in rule right now, but we can do that sort of in alignment with your rulemaking. You're planning on doing some updates, just sort of technical small updates. So this can be one of them. I'm not sure that it is in a it might be in policy somewhere, but I'm not sure if the list is available in one of those more formal places right now that is publicly available. But we will make sure it happens so that you can reference it in your rules.
Okay, great. Any other questions from the group on this list of documents? And just the citizenship verification in general? Dina.
Thank you. So thinking back to a control that we can put in place for the false C flags, or for someone that is a legacy record that is identified as a C. And unless those individuals were coming in for a real ID and presenting documentation, they might still get stuck in the process. So the control to put in place would be, we're going to turn the screen to them. They're going to get handed a brochure because they're flagged as a C, and there will be advised that your voter, you are being included in the Oregon motor voter process. Is the screen that that person is seeing in multiple languages?
And the brochure.
And the brochure.
Yeah, I don't believe that we have it in multiple languages. Michelle, let me know if.
No, so that screen is only in English. However, I personally have taken that. I do like a copy and a paste into a Word document, and I do a Google Translate into the another language. If they don't have an interpreter with them, or they can speak English, but they can't read English, there's that conversation as well. And then I ask their preferred language so that I can get it. But there's not a way for me to like click a button and just make it automatically change. There is some work that we have to do, but we're willing to do it to make sure that everybody can understand.
Yeah, maybe it would be good to just have that disclaimer about you're being registered. Maybe that's in the top 5 languages or something of Oregon's population.
David?
Yeah, thanks. If we have this, it probably exists, and forgive me if it's in the materials and I didn't see it. Is there also a list of documents that clearly establish non-citizenship at the moment when they're when the customer is interacting? And then lastly, is there a list of documents which satisfy the legal presence requirement but leave ambiguity as to with regards to citizenship?
So we don't require legal presence in Oregon to get a credential. So except for Real ID, then you would have to show your legal presence documents. We did collect that information from 2009 to 2021. So there's quite a lot of documentation available, but just not for everyone. And sorry, what was the last part of the question?
It was just for anyone that is, I guess, just getting a Real ID compliant license. They should be showing proof of legal presence consistent with federal law. And some of those proof of legal presence is clearly established at that moment that they are not a citizen. Some of them establish that they are a citizen. And I believe there's a very small number that leave ambiguity as to with regard to citizenship status. And it would be good to have kind of separate lists of each of those and create pathways so that there is the only way that there can be a false positive is with that very small number of documents that are ambiguous as to citizenship, with regard to Real ID transactions, at least.
Well, that list that I presented are the only ones that will produce a C, and those are the only ones that will go in OMV. And so that's that's our list. That's the only ones that will ever go into OMV. We do have a few different buckets, but none of those are registered to vote. We do have a list of ambiguous documents that we ask if they would like to register to vote. So that's the EDVR process. Do you want me to pull up that list? I do have that.
Yeah, I think if you don't mind, Kat, let's go ahead and pull that up because it'll let us touch on the EDVR process again.
So N is for not confirmed, and that doesn't mean that we that they're not citizens, just that we have ambiguous documentation. So they will be offered the question, and the attestation includes, you know, I'm a citizen, I'm eligible, there's this fine, you could face jail time, there's, you know, all this information, and they're attesting multiple times that that this information is correct. And so they're asked the first question, they're asked if they say, yeah, I want to register to vote, is, are you a citizen of the United States? So this first one, you know, there's this Canadian driver license, and I believe that's in the list because we kind of lump a few of these together, and we could think about separating these out. But I think, Michelle, if you know, I think the option is like Canadian or other ID card. And so sometimes that will produce EDDR, although I think the TSRs probably don't ask if it is Canadian specifically. Yeah, do you know what I'm talking about, Michelle?
So the U.S. territorial or Canadian driver's license designation is part of what we would designate as other driver's licenses. And the reason why the Canadian driver's license is part of that is we do accept it as proof of identity, but it's part of the other. We don't have it pulled out specifically separated from other. It's kind of lumped in with the out of state or U.S. territorial.
Yeah, so that's fine.
Yeah, so with this, I just wanted to, again, be very clear and clarify. So anybody that's producing one of these documents and is getting an N legal presence indicator, the Oliver system is not including them in the OMV file. In fact, this is where it is flagging the TSR to say this person is showing unambiguous credentials, offer them electronic voter registration per the National Voter Registration or NVRA Act. That's correct. That is this particular subset of individuals.
Yes. And I would say for that Canadian driver's license, that would show up in our report where we're double checking our C indicators against potentially conflicting documents. So we would look at that and investigate the record more if it came up. But yeah, this is for just that question of, do you want to register to vote?
Yeah, so these folks are not being included in an automatic voter registration system. This is not automatic registration. They are being presented an opportunity to register, but that's separate than automatic registration. They'll be going through their own attestations for qualifications.
Yes, and I know our elections officials know this, but we are required to ask this per NVRA for folks that could be eligible to register to vote.
Any other questions from the group on this subset of documents, this process? Thanks for going through that, Kat. Appreciate it. Okay, so we got about a half an hour left, so just want to do a time check there. And then I see a question from Ulysses.
Yeah, sorry, I don't think I fully understood what Kat said. If they get designated an N, if their status is ambiguous, they get asked if a DMV official can ask if they're a U.S. citizen to be determined if they're eligible to vote, or did I understand that incorrectly?
No, so the question that we ask is, do you want to register to vote?
Oh, okay.
And then they tell us yes or no.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
And that process, that electronic process, is what we were referring to down here on the bottom of this slide. Whereas if the transaction's occurring within 30 days of a registration deadline, DMV must offer electronic or paper registration. And we can go on to the next slide where we're kind of continuing these. Okay. So DMV technicians will inform individuals that their PIN pad signature will be compared to the signature on their ballot envelope. Signage will be posted at PIN pads to notify users, and DMV will ensure the most recent signature is sent to the Secretary of State for each covered transaction. So we've talked about a couple different options for this. The next slide will actually get into like minimum specifications for the PIN pads. I don't know that we have gathered any additional information on those, but I think this kind of covers the intention of trying to educate those individuals to provide their best signature so that that signature will be used on their voter registration file to validate their ballot, petition signatures, so on and so forth. So we're trying to let them know that's important to provide a good signature during this process. Any questions, comments, feedback here? Dina.
Thank you. My brain is just going straight down the path of, okay, we've been talking about how to notify a person that their information is going to be part of the OMV process. And we've talked about the turning the screen section. So this is where they're going to potentially have a brief statement that says, you know, this information is going to be passed to the Secretary of State's office for Oregon Motor Voter. There's a potential to collect a signature there potentially, or my question, I guess, is there an opportunity to collect the signature there and to have that same statement say the signature that you sign here is going to be used for verification when you return your ballot? Like, is this an opportunity to have everything one-stop shop in that notification? Hand them the brochure that says, okay, you're flagged to see, you're getting the OMV verification screen. On that screen, we're advising them about what their signature is. That screen is potentially in the 5 most popular languages. They're getting past the brochure. That sounds great to me. I mean, is there an opportunity on that screen? And I think it's called the verification screen is what you've referred to it as, Kat and Michelle. Does that feel doable?
Unfortunately, we do collect signatures at the counter at the end of that transaction, but just the quality of it is not good enough for voter registration purposes. We use it more as just their attestation, they're acknowledging and signing. But the actual image is just not very good. So what we do send to Secretary of State is the photo capture station, separate PIN pad signature. So unfortunately, it can't be all done right at the same moment, but within the same, transaction, as long as they don't leave. Sometimes people do leave before getting their signature and photo, but they don't get their credential when they do that, and we don't send the information on. But in part because we really need that high quality signature, both for the card and for your voter registration purposes and ballot comparison purposes. So right now, the PIN pads we have at the counter are not going to be able to accomplish that.
So it sounds like the clarification that we might need to put is the signage needs to be posted at the photo capture PIN pad at the signature pad where it is gathering the signature that will be used for voter registration purposes.
Right. Yeah. So that can be part of the that process for getting signature and photo, is that we have that language at that particular station. So it's not necessarily at the counter, but it is at that photo capture station.
Anything else on signatures from the group? And Carol, if you can just advance the slide to the PIN pad section. And then Ulysses, I see your hand up.
Yeah, so back to what Dina said about, the disclaimer being sort of like a one-stop shop. I know we're wanting to let folks know that like their information is getting transferred to Secretary of State from there. I know Dina mentioned, top 5 languages for the disclaimer and then the brochures as well. I'm not sure if this is where this would get included, but I'm still a little concerned about the false positive Cs. And I want to make sure that folks who aren't eligible understand what it is, what they would be registering, or in this case, should not register for. So maybe just kind of advising them of the consequences of incorrectly registering, if that could be done, and the signature pad as well as the brochure, just to protect folks who, uh, you know, don't always know exactly what it is that they're signing off on.
Yeah, thank you for flagging that. And that really is the intention of these multiple notifications throughout the process. So if we're including a notification in the transaction review screen, and then there's a separate notification on the signature collection pad, there's at least 2 different opportunities where an individual should be informed that their information is being transferred to the Secretary of State for voter registration purposes. Once we get to, I think in a couple weeks when we talk about the Secretary of State processing, we'll talk about the card that we send to OMV folks. And there, I believe there's plenty of opportunity there to also improve our messaging to folks who potentially might be caught up in that system that they don't want to be, or they're not qualified for, where they would have an opportunity to opt out. So I think those are important, that we are providing multiple notifications and not just, well, we offered it once and they missed the opportunity. We want to have plenty of opportunities to notify folks what's going on.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Dina.
One note before moving on from there, it would be great to work on together on some language about what I jotted down was like a quick advisement of what the consequences are in working with, when we're creating that language for the brochure, and or if there's room on the second pin pad that's collecting the good signature that's passed to the Secretary of State, understanding like the number of characters, what can we include on that pin pad when we're collecting that signature as that final check. We'd be glad to work with you, Yuli, to kind of understand, like, if we are only allowed 20 characters or something within the technology, what do we want to say? And I mean, really, if somebody at that time is reading a notice and Kat and Michelle, if they're like, oh, wait, I'm not a qualified individual, like understanding at that point what the technician needs to understand, because we, there's the point about somebody saying, no, I want to opt out. I don't want to be involved or registered to vote, or somebody saying, I'm not qualified. And how do we trigger or a response from them for them to say, oh, wait, I'm not a qualified individual. That way they can not opt out, make the correction of the record before it's transferred over. So happy to talk about what that language looks like and where we can put those notices. I think those are really important. So thank you.
Yeah, I would be more than happy to talk to my supervisors and talk to them about drafting language, sort of what we would want the messages and the notices to say, just to make sure people are making the correct decision for themselves, or that applies to them.
That's great. Thank you. So I think we'll need to do a little bit further research on this screen specifically for what those best standards should be for signature gathering. And really, I think what we also want to know is what the current specifications are for the photo capture pin pad, because we do know that pin pad does capture quality signatures, or at least of a minimum quality, that they work for voter registration purposes. So I think that needs to be like our starting point for what that is, and then we can define if it doesn't meet those qualifications. Okay. So we have already in our conversation today covered all three of these topics. The EDVR process for those with unknown qualifications, change of addresses, and vehicle purchases. So kudos to the group for covering those three during our previous discussions. That pretty much wraps up our content for this week. But I want to provide an opportunity if anybody else has any other feedback, any questions from what we've talked about today that we still want to bring up.
I think the point Yuli made about notifying people and then having a way to follow up in a way, hopefully that doesn't. I think a lot of people maybe get this mailer especially and are like, oh, I'm not eligible, but I'm scared to interact with the government. If we can think about ways to, and it might be more on the DMV side of, ways they can safely inform the TSR, or maybe submit a piece of paper or something saying like, please review my record. Because I don't know that people would necessarily be comfortable in that moment saying, hey, I'm not a citizen. We don't want to put them in that position either. So yeah, that's just something that has occurred to me, is having that, like, okay, if someone's discovered that there's an error in their record, what's their sort of safe path to getting that corrected, so that they're not just waiting on a card from Secretary of State and maybe just opting out, because that doesn't fix the problem with the DMV data. So that's something I'm thinking about too.
Yeah, I do think there's got to be like a sensitive way to go about doing this, because I'm like totally in occurrence that like we shouldn't be asking folks about their status about at these interactions.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I guess I think that gives me an opportunity to make a larger just generalization, that one of the things with this system is it's called automatic voter registration. It's an automatic collection of that data. So we're collecting that data and transferring out automatically. But those folks are not registered automatically. There is still process in place. There's the opt-out process that they're offered to opt out or select a party. And then that data gets transferred to the county clerks. So the clerks still have that final determination of whether the person meets qualifications. So there are multiple opportunities for an individual, if they are not qualified, to be able to pull themselves out of this process before they are registered to vote. So I guess as we're talking about this, we're trying to capture this data and keep the data as clean as possible, but it's not automatically added to the voter rolls. And I think that's an important distinction, that there's opportunities for us to interrupt, and that final opportunity is the local election official and that voter registration official when they're accepting and processing the voter registration that comes through the Oregon motor voter system. So we need to identify those specific places and call them out and provide those opportunities for folks. So appreciate that feedback. Michelle.
So then that brought my question of, then if it's determined by the state secretary or the county clerks that this person is not qualified, is there a process then to notify DMV so that we can adjust our record so that we're not perpetuating the same issue the next time they come in?
Yeah, that's a good question that I think we need to get a little bit of clarity on how we do that going forward. Tina.
Thank you. I would say, just to add some clarification there, that mechanism didn't exist before before Secretary Reed hired and in the position of automatic voter registration policy analyst, and before Kat was here, and before Kat and Ann started working together and we started building these systems. So we're very new in the systems that we're putting in place. And next week, we'll really kind of, as we get into the transferring data between agencies, look at the controls that we've been able to put in place around these systems. So we're really in the early stages of creating these systems, and that's why this group is so valuable to have subject matter experts from all these areas providing information that will help us improve our systems. But we have those same questions. So I'm really grateful for this opportunity to talk through these pieces and just to address again there are opportunities for folks that are with the false positive, the false C, to pull themselves out, but they need to be better. We need to be better about it. Like when the clerks receive the information, the OMB process says that only qualified individuals will be pulled into the process. So the onus is on DMV to verify the qualifications. That data goes to counties, and counties are going to register that person if it's all complete. And then they'll send a notice to that person that says, hey, you've been registered to vote. Oftentimes that might be a flag for someone to say, oh, shoot, I was registered to vote and I'm not a qualified individual. Most of the time they don't understand maybe what the qualifications are. So this is a good opportunity for us to talk about all of those controls and how they can be better. So I really look forward to hearing everyone's ideas on how we can improve this process. I'm really glad to be a part of it, and I really appreciate everybody's participation.
Thanks, Dina. That kind of lays the groundwork. So like going forward, next week, we'll talk about data transfers. I think we'll talk about what DMV does on their side, their final checks, their integrity checks that they do before the data is transferred, the transfer process, and then the checks that we do on our side around data transfers. So that's on the agenda for next week. Just to let people know, it might be a little dense because we're talking about data transfers, but we do really appreciate your participation and your feedback. Carol, I see your hand is up.
Thanks, and I also just wanted to circle back on one comment that was put in the chat. We've only had 2 so far, and I know Anne read the second one, but just for stating for the public record earlier, we did have someone ask if we could resend the email link to Michelle. So again, just trying to be super transparent about what's included in that, and apologies to the public for it not being something you can view, but we'll continue to state that moving forward.
Thank you, Carol. And so I think that will end our RAC meeting for the day. Thank you all for attending, and thank you for your participation. Your feedback is incredibly valuable. Look forward to next week and continuing our discussion.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.